Everything changed the moment my husband's teenage daughter jabbed her finger at my face and called me the maid in front of dozens of people. When I finally stood up for myself, my husband walked over without asking a single question and slapped me across the face. Then he shouted that I was nothing more than a freeloader living off his success and ordered me out of his house. I left without arguing. Less than 24 hours later, my phone rang over and over. For the first time in 10 years, I heard that same proud man crying because the life he believed he controlled was already falling apart. My name is Emily Carter, and for a decade I was married to a man who believed being the loudest person in the room made him the most important. My husband, Ryan Carter, owned a successful heating and plumbing company just outside Knoxville. Everyone admired him because he had the perfect story. He loved telling people how he started with one rusty truck, a toolbox, and determination, until he built a respected local business. Every dinner, community fundraiser, and neighborhood gathering became another stage where he repeated that story while smiling like he had conquered the world all by himself. People naturally liked Ryan. He remembered names, made strangers laugh within minutes, and had a way of making everyone feel like an old friend. Customers trusted him, employees respected him, and neighbors admired his confidence. Standing beside him, I was almost invisible. I never enjoyed being the center of attention anyway. I preferred listening, solving problems quietly, and making sure everything actually worked instead of talking about it. While Ryan entertained clients, I handled the details that kept the company alive. I organized payroll, renewed licenses before they expired, scheduled inspections, answered emergency calls, and built relationships with suppliers who trusted me enough to extend deadlines whenever unexpected problems appeared. Ryan dismissed all of that as office work, as though paperwork somehow handled itself. He never realized that businesses rarely collapse because of one huge mistake. They fall apart because hundreds of small responsibilities are ignored. When we married, the company had barely a dozen employees and struggled to pay its bills. 10 years later, it had grown into a respected operation with dozens of workers, multiple service trucks, and contracts with several large medical facilities. Ryan proudly accepted every compliment while calling himself a self-made businessman. I never asked for recognition because I believed we were building something together. Looking back, I understand that we were living to completely different versions of the same marriage. I had once worked full-time at a dental office, but Ryan constantly needed help with the business. Every week he promised it would only be temporary. One busy week turned into another until I eventually left my own career behind. Before long, I was working longer hours than anyone else without a paycheck or an official title. I convinced myself that supporting my husband meant supporting our future, even if nobody else noticed what I sacrificed. Ryan had a daughter named Ashley from his first marriage. She was only 6 years old when I entered her life. She used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, ask me to braid her hair before school, and insist that only I could make her favorite dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets the right way. I never tried replacing her mother. I simply loved her the best I could, believing that kindness eventually became family. For years our little routine felt natural, but somewhere along the way everything shifted. Ryan slowly changed the language he used whenever people asked about our lives. Instead of saying our home or our company, he started saying my house, my business, and my money. At first I brushed it aside because they sounded like harmless expressions. Eventually those words stopped sounding casual. They became reminders of where he believed I belonged. Ashley changed with him. As she grew older, she stopped asking for help and started expecting it. Dirty dishes stayed wherever she left them, laundry piled across the hallway because she assumed someone else would pick it up. Whenever I reminded her that she was old enough to clean after herself, Ryan laughed it off and told me she was just a teenager dealing with stress. Every excuse taught her the same lesson. Someone else would always clean up after her. The company barbecue that June looked perfect from the outside. Strings of lights hung across the backyard while the smoker filled the air with the smell of barbecue. Employees brought their families. Children chased each other across the lawn, and Ryan proudly walked from group to group accepting compliments about his growing business. I had been awake since before sunrise preparing food, setting up tables, and making sure every guest had what they needed. Ryan barely noticed because he assumed everything would simply appear exactly when he wanted it. Late that afternoon, Ashley walked outside with 2 friends. Without even greeting me, she asked where the gluten-free buns were. I calmly told her they were waiting in the pantry, and she could grab them herself. She stared at me with complete disbelief, almost offended that I expected her to walk into the house. Then she stepped closer, lifted her finger inches from my face, and spoke words that instantly erased 10 years of love and sacrifice. "Do your job, Maid." For a second the entire backyard fell silent. I looked into her face and searched for the little girl who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms. Instead I saw someone who had learned that humiliating people was a way to prove power. I took a slow breath and quietly answered that she needed to watch her mouth. Before another word could be spoken, Ryan stormed across the yard. He never asked what happened, he never wondered why I looked hurt. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and slapped me so hard that conversations stopped all around us. Every pair of eyes turned toward us as the sound echoed across the yard. At that moment, I realized the marriage I had spent 10 years protecting had already ended long before his hand ever reached my face. Ryan glared at me as though I had embarrassed him instead of defending myself. His face was red with anger while everyone stood frozen around us. Then he shouted that I was nothing but a freeloader who lived in his house, spent his money, and had no right to disrespect his daughter. Finally, he pointed toward the front of the house and ordered me to leave immediately. Nobody spoke. Even Ashley looked shaken after hearing her father scream those words in front of our friends, neighbors, and employees. I gently touched my burning cheek and looked around the backyard one last time. I had imagined this moment many times over the years. I thought I would cry, argue, or finally tell everyone how much of that business I had built with my own hands. Instead, an unexpected calm settled over me. Without raising my voice, I simply nodded, turned around, and walked into the house that I had spent years turning into a home. Inside, everything looked painfully ordinary. Food still waited on the kitchen island, family photographs lined the hallway, and my purse rested on the same chair where I always left it. I carried one suitcase upstairs and packed only what truly belonged to me: clothes, important documents, medication, my laptop, and a few pieces of jewelry from my mother. I refused to take anything that could become another excuse for Ryan to call me selfish or greedy. Before leaving, I quietly placed my house key on the kitchen counter. Through the back windows I could still see everyone standing outside. Ryan paced across the patio pretending he remained in control, but I could already recognize the panic hiding beneath his anger. Without another word, I walked out the front door and drove straight to my closest friend, Megan, who welcomed me with nothing more than a warm hug and a simple invitation to come inside. That evening I ignored every responsibility that had controlled my life for years. I did not check payroll schedules, answer supplier emails, or remind Ryan about meetings waiting for him on Monday morning. For the first time in a decade, I allowed the company to survive without me solving every problem before anyone noticed it existed. The next morning my phone began vibrating before 8 o'clock. Ryan called again and again before finally sending a text asking where the payroll information was stored. I looked at the message for several seconds before putting my phone back on the table. Nothing had been moved. Every file remained exactly where it had always been. The only difference was that Ryan had never bothered learning how any of it actually worked because he believed I would always be there. A little while later Melissa, the payroll coordinator, called sounding completely overwhelmed. She explained that Ryan could not access the payroll system because he did not even know which program handled employee salaries. I calmly reminded her that he already had administrator access and simply needed to follow company procedures. She paused, surprised that I was not rushing back to rescue everyone. For years, every emergency had landed on my shoulders, and people had forgotten those responsibilities were never mine alone. By mid-morning, more calls flooded my phone. The bank needed financial documents. The insurance broker wanted updated paperwork. One of our attorneys had questions about commercial contracts. Supervisors were asking for guidance because Ryan seemed confused about basic systems he supposedly managed every day. Sitting across from me, Megan quietly asked if I planned to answer any of them. I smiled subtly and told her they were not really looking for me. They were looking for the person who quietly held every piece together. Around lunchtime I finally answered one of Ryan's calls. His confident voice had disappeared completely. Instead, I heard heavy breathing followed by a nervous question about a maintenance contract he could not locate. I calmly explained where everything was stored, but he admitted he could not remember passwords or procedures because he had never learned them. Then, after a long silence, He asked a question I never expected to hear. What am I supposed to do now? For just a moment, old habits almost took over. My mind automatically began searching for solutions like it had every day for 10 years. Then I remembered standing in the backyard with my cheek burning while he publicly humiliated me. I quietly told him he would have to figure it out himself before ending the call. After hanging up, my hands trembled, not because I regretted my decision, but because it was the first time in our entire marriage that I had refused to save him from the consequences of his own choices. Megan reached across the table, smiled gently, and told me it was about time I started protecting myself instead of everyone else. The following day I met Melissa for coffee away from the office. She looked exhausted after only 48 hours. She explained that every employee knew how to perform their own individual job, but nobody understood how all the different pieces connected the way I always had. Ryan spent most of his day yelling whenever something went wrong instead of solving the actual problem. The atmosphere inside the office had completely changed, and everyone could feel it. Before leaving, Melissa handed me a list of everything that had already gone wrong since I walked away. Delayed contracts, missing paperwork, supplier issues, scheduling conflicts, customer complaints, insurance deadlines, and payroll confusion filled nearly an entire page. None of those problems happened because I sabotaged anything. They happened because I stopped preventing disasters before anyone realized they were coming. As I folded the paper, I finally understood something that had taken me years to see. My value had never come from being loud or demanding recognition. It came from showing up every single day, solving problems, caring about people, and keeping promises no one else even realized existed. Ryan had built a successful company, but I had quietly built the foundation that allowed it to stand. Now that foundation was gone, and for the first time in his life, he was beginning to understand exactly what he had lost.